The conductor stopped the old soldier until she read what he carried in his pocket. Every Friday at 3:17 p.m., old Heinrich was there with his worn wool beret, a gray overcoat that had seen many winters, and a weathered leather briefcase. He boarded the same regional train in Bavaria, always in the same carriage, always the same seat, heading to a small village called Waldesruhe, a place lost among dense forests and silent mountains, where time seemed to stand still. No one knew exactly why that frail old man, with a distant gaze and slow steps, made the same journey week after week. Most regular passengers, rural workers, elderly ladies returning from the market, sleepy students, merely noticed him with quiet curiosity. To them, Heinrich was almost a mystical presence, part of the station's routine, like the train whistle or the creaking of the metal doors. Heinrich didn't talk much. He responded to greetings with a slight nod, thanked with a discreet smile when someone held the door for him or offered space on a bench. But there was something about him that commanded respect and stirred a trace of melancholy. His deep blue eyes, full of stories, revealed something unfinished, a mission left incomplete. The ritual always began the same way. He arrived at the platform 20 minutes early, sat on the same wooden bench, removed his hat, and looked at the station clock. At exactly 3:17 p.m., he stood up with military precision, as if answering an invisible call. Then he boarded, silently, heading toward his destination. The journey took about 2 hours. Heinrich spent the entire time looking out the window, though he seemed not to see the landscape. It was as if he were trapped in memories only he could access. From time to time, he would take out a carefully folded letter from his briefcase and regard it with reverence. He never opened it. He simply held it in his hands, as if guarding something sacred. The train staff already knew him. Some let him board without showing a ticket. "It's the old man with a letter," they would say to each other with a mix of affection and pity. They knew he probably couldn't afford the fare, but they also knew this journey meant something to him, though they didn't know what. Until one spring afternoon, something changed. It was Lara's first week as a conductor on that line. Young, responsible, and determined, she took her job seriously. When she saw Heinrich board without presenting a ticket, she approached him with gentleness, but firmness. "Good afternoon, sir. May I see your ticket, please?" Heinrich, as always, gave a small nod and began searching his pockets with trembling hands. But instead of a ticket, he pulled out a yellowed letter, folded many times, with old handwriting on the envelope. He held it out to Lara with a calm gesture. "Read it," he said, his voice deep and low, as if that simple request carried the weight of decades. Lara hesitated. She looked around, sensing the passenger's eyes on her. Then she turned back to the old man. There was something in his eyes that made her give in. Carefully, she opened the letter. The words, written in faded ink, began to unfold before her eyes. It was a farewell message. A comrade in war, amid the chaos of World War II, asking that if he didn't survive, someone deliver the letter to the daughter he never got to meet. He asked that she know she had been loved, even from afar, even in the silence of absence, that he had kept a medallion with a photograph, and that, with luck, one day she would recognize it. Lara swallowed hard. The carriage went silent. Something in that paper, in the story between the lines, reached across decades and touched everyone there. And in that moment, she understood. Old Heinrich was trying to fulfill a promise made on the battlefield, a promise made to a brother in arms, a promise he had been trying to keep week after week, never giving up. She handed the letter back with trembling hands and said, "Wait here a moment." Lara went to the engineer's cabin and quickly explained what had happened. Within minutes, the passengers mobilized. Coins and bills passed from hand to hand. People who had never spoken to Heinrich now looked at him with deep respect. Silently, someone paid the fare for that day. Heinrich, his eyes brimming, thanked them with a nod. The train departed. That afternoon, at 3:17 p.m., old Heinrich boarded once again. But this time, for the first time, someone traveled with him, not just physically, but with their hearts beside him. The train continued its journey as the sun began to dip behind the Bavarian hills, casting long shadows over fields and villages. In the carriage where Heinrich sat, the atmosphere had changed. There was silence, yes, but not the indifferent silence from before. It was a silence of attention, of respect. A silence of those who understood they were witnessing something greater than routine. Laura didn't return to her post right after checking tickets. She remained there, standing in the aisle, watching the old man in profile. Heinrich held the letter between his fingers as if it were made of glass. From time to time, he caressed the envelope with his thumb, absorbed, as if he were speaking with time itself. She sat down in front of him, saying nothing. She didn't want to intrude, but there was something in her chest that wouldn't let her just go back to work. She needed to know more. "Did you know the man who wrote the letter?" she asked gently. Heinrich nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the window. "His name was Emil. We fought together in Italy. The final days of the war, he was hit in an ambush, died in my arms." A heavy silence fell, as if the air in the carriage had grown thicker. Heinrich continued, "Before he died, he gave me this letter. Asked that if I survived, I find his daughter. Said she lived in that village, Waldesruh. I never knew her name. All I had was this," he pointed to the envelope, "and a locket with a photo of her as a baby." Laura felt a lump in her throat. "And you've been going there every week since then?" "Yes, I've been to every house, knocked on every door. But no one knows Emil. Many there died in the war. Families moved away. Sometimes I think maybe she never lived there. Maybe he was mistaken. But even so, I promise. And promises made in war are a man's last words. You can't ignore that." Heinrich's words hung in the air, heavy and sacred. Laura held back her emotion, but couldn't hide the shimmer in her eyes. There sat a man who, even after more than 50 years, still carried the weight of a promise. A man most treated as an eccentric old soul, but who was, in truth, a survivor, a guardian of memory. The train neared the final station. Heinrich adjusted his beret, stood up with effort, leaning on his wooden cane. Laura walked with him to the door, sensing that, somehow, she now belonged to that quiet mission. As they stepped off at Waldesruh station, the village seemed to welcome the veterans' arrival. It was a place of narrow streets, houses with flowered windows, and a central square surrounded by ancient trees. Heinrich walked paths he knew by heart. Laura, determined, walked by his side. "Today, may I come with you?" she asked. Heinrich looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled, brief and deep. It would be an honor. And so they began knocking on doors. At each house, Heinrich showed the photo from the locket, asked in a calm and weary voice. The answers were always the same. "I don't know, never seen her. I'm sorry." But instead of discouragement, there was something in the old man that remained steady, a patience that comes from knowing some promises require more than haste. They require faith. Near the end of Main Street, an elderly woman with white hair and sharp eyes lingered as she looked at the photo. She reached for her glasses, examined the image, then looked at Heinrich with surprise. "That child, she looks very much like Elise's daughter. Elise passed away a few years ago, but her daughter still lives here. Her name is Anna. She lives in the country house by the lake." Heinrich's eyes widened. Laura took his hand, feeling the emotion of the moment sweep through her. "Can you show us the way?" The woman nodded, and minutes later, they walked down a path lined with pine trees. The sun began to dip low, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. And there, between the deep green forest and the still mirror of the lake, stood a simple wooden house with lace curtains and windows. Heinrich paused for a moment, took a deep breath, closed his eyes, clutched the locket tightly between his fingers. Then he walked forward. Laura stayed a few steps behind. She knew that moment wasn't hers. It belonged to Emil, to Heinrich, and to a daughter who was finally about to discover a forgotten piece of her own story. The old man walked up to the door and knocked 3 times. She opened it, and then the past met the present. The door creaked slowly as it opened. Standing there was a woman in her early 50s, with gentle features and a serene expression. Her eyes, brown, lively, carried the quiet curiosity of someone who lives in peace, yet still holds unanswered questions. Heinrich stood motionless for a moment. A light breeze stirred the brim of his beret. He held his cane in one hand, and in the other, the yellowed envelope now slightly crumpled by time and the hopes it carried. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice steady but low. "Are you Anna?" She frowned slightly. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" Heinrich extended the envelope slowly, as if every inch of the gesture was part of sacred ritual. His eyes shone with an ancient light. "This envelope is for you. It was written by your father, Emil, during the war. He asked me to deliver it. He died in my arms in 1945. For a moment, everything stopped. Anna fell silent, as if the world around her had vanished. The wind, the birds, even the gentle sound of the lake seemed suspended. "My father," she whispered, as if saying the name of someone she only knew from stories. "But he died before I was born." Heinrich nodded. "I know. He spoke of you as if he already knew you. As if, even without having seen you grow, he already had enough love for a lifetime." Anna raised a hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the tears that came rushing. She took the envelope carefully. Her hands were trembling. "I thought I'd never know anything about him. My mother rarely spoke of him. She said it hurt too much." Laura, watching from a distance, placed a hand over her heart. It was pounding. The emotion of the moment filled everything. She knew she was witnessing something rare, a bridge being built between past and present. Anna slowly opened the letter. Inside, a folded sheet and a small locket fell into her hand. She recognized the locket immediately, the same one her mother used to wear hidden, as if it held a piece of an impossible love. With teary eyes, Anna began to read. Her voice faltered, but she pressed on. "My dearest daughter, if this letter finds you, it means the war did not take all of me, that a part of me made it through time to reach you. I never got to see you, to hold you, to teach you to walk. But I dreamed of you every day, amid the noise of bombs and the fear of not returning. It was you who kept me standing. I loved you from the moment I knew you existed. I write this letter so you never doubt that. I hope you grew up surrounded by love, that you are strong, like your mother, that you are gentle, as I imagine your eyes to be. One day, perhaps, this old friend who walks beside me will manage to deliver this to you. If he has reached you, then the promise has been fulfilled. And wherever I may be, I will know that love can triumph even over war." By the time she finished, Anna was crying openly. And it wasn't a sad cry. It was freeing. It was as if for years she had lived with an unexplainable emptiness and now, finally, understood its source. Heinrich remained silent. His firm expression barely concealed the emotion glistening in the corners of his eyes. But inside, a weight decades old seemed to dissolve. "Thank you," Anna whispered, hugging the locket to her chest. "Thank you for not giving up, for coming all those weeks, not knowing if you would ever find me. It was for him, and for you. I made a promise," Heinrich replied simply, but with a quiet pride, the kind of pride that comes with completing a sacred mission. She stepped closer, hesitantly. Then she embraced him. It was a long hug, a silent one, a hug that crossed decades of absence, unanswered questions, and quiet longing. Laura, watching, wiped away a tear. Other villagers were approaching, curious. Some train passengers, who had seen Heinrich on so many trips without understanding his destination, were there too, as if everything had finally fallen into place. And on that Friday afternoon, at 3:17 p.m., old Heinrich didn't just step off the train with an envelope. He stepped off with a piece of the past and left behind a more complete present. Anna invited him in for tea to talk. And there, among reconstructed memories and old photographs, a new story was born. Because sometimes all a life needs to make sense is a promise fulfilled. The kettle was softly whistling in Anna's small kitchen as the sun began to hide behind the Bavarian mountains. Outside, the day was saying goodbye with a golden light that passed through the windows and spread across the house like a silent blessing. Heinrich sat at the table, looking around. There were old portraits on the walls, most of them of Anna's mother, a woman with delicate features and strong eyes. On a wooden shelf, a picture frame held a photo of young Anna holding a handmade doll. She served the tea with hands still trembling. It was as if each movement, each word exchanged with Heinrich, stitched together pieces of a story that had never been told. Until now. My mother never married, Anna said with a melancholy smile. She used to say she had loved enough for a lifetime. Heinrich smiled. There was something of Emil in that woman. The quiet strength, the gentleness in her eyes, even the way she spoke. It was as if he were seeing a living extension of the friend he had lost so many years ago. He spoke of her with devotion, the old man replied. Sometimes, in the middle of the bombings, when everything was just fear and mud, Emil would go quiet and then say he was thinking about her eyes. It was the only thing that made sense. Anna swallowed hard. The weight of her father's absence now shared space with a new feeling, a kind of peace, a reunion, even if delayed. She opened a small wooden box and took out some age letters. He wrote to her before going to front, many times. She read them all to me when I was a child, but she never told me he had left a letter for me. Heinrich looked at the locket, now resting on the table beside the teacup. He gave me that envelope just before he died, told me to deliver it in person, said it would only make sense with time, and that you would understand, even if he wasn't around to explain. Anna nodded, moved. I do understand. I really do. There was a moment of silence. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of memories beginning to take shape, full of gratitude for something that had almost been lost, but was saved through persistence and loyalty. Outside, Laura waited by the gate. She didn't want to come in. She felt that moment belonged to them alone. But she was there because somehow she felt part of it. The conductor who had once said no to an old soldier boarding a train and had ended up boarding, unknowingly, one of the most moving stories of her life. Heinrich stood up slowly. His movements were still heavy, marked by the years, but his face was lighter, as if, after decades, an invisible weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. Anna, you've given me a gift, the greatest an old man like me could receive, to see that he wasn't forgotten, to know that you grew up, that you're strong, that you've lived a good life. She stepped closer and gently held his hands. And you gave me back my father. There was another hug, one of those that defy explanation, that say more than any words. A hug between generations, between what was and what still could be. Before leaving, Heinrich pulled something from the inside pocket of his coat. It was an old photograph, yellowed with frayed corners. In it, Emil and Heinrich, still young in uniform, covered in mud, but smiling with camaraderie. It's yours, he said. I think it deserves to come home. Anna held the photo as if it were glass. She looked tenderly at her father, so young, so alive in that image, and then, with the same warmth, at Heinrich. On the way back to the station, Heinrich walked beside Laura. The sun had already set, and the mountain night brought a cold breeze. But he didn't feel the cold. You know this is the last time I'll make this trip, don't you? He said, watching the sky darken. Laura smiled, her eyes still wet. I know, and I'm glad I said no that Friday. Heinrich chuckled softly. Sometimes it's a no that clears the way for what truly matters. She held his arm gently. And you still have so much to teach, Mr. Heinrich. Promise you'll come back and tell more of these stories. He looked at her with affection, and for the first time in many years, he said, Now I can live in the present. At the station, the tracks were already lit by the headlights of the train, the same as always, the same time, the same platform, but everything had changed, because that day, it wasn't just a return journey. It was a farewell to sorrow, a reunion with peace, a promise fulfilled.